Okay.
I think that's going.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Capture and Monetize the Impact of Your Work. My name is Christy Farmbaugh, and I'm the Innovation and Engagement Director here at the Ohio Arts Council. A big part of my work here is to facilitate professional learning opportunities for the field. This monthly webinar series, this is the third in our series, and it's being offered because constituents have told us you'd like to learn ways to do your work more efficiently and effectively. We're really excited to have more than 60 professionals participating in today's session. And today's webinar will provide a sneak peek into some of the ideas and content that we're planning during the Arts Impact Ohio Conference scheduled for Thursday, May 19th. I'll tell you a little bit more about this at the end of the webinar. We hope you'll join us, and you can find registration information on the OAC's website. Before I introduce today's presenter, a few technical details are necessary. First, everyone who's participating in the webinar is in listen-only mode. This will help us cut down on feedback during the presentation. There are 3 handouts from our presenter posted in the system, and you can find those under the Handout tab in the Webinar Control Panel. Feel free to download those, save them to your computer, and use them later. We'll use the question box in the control panel for capturing your questions for the presenter. I'll monitor those as we go through the session, and we'll respond as we can. Our presenter will ask a couple of questions and have us interacting during the session, so please answer those questions in the chat feature in your webinar control panel. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll send the link out to everyone when it's ready in a couple of days. And after today's webinar, you'll find a link to a brief survey in your email inbox. Please take 5 minutes to give us your input about today's presentation. Your feedback is really important to help us design more meaningful professional development opportunities for you in the future. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's webinar presenter, Jerry Yoshitomi, Chief Knowledge Officer of Meaning Matters, LLC. Jerry Yoshitomi believes in the power of the arts to transform lives. He's contributed to modest initiatives that have resulted in significant innovation and change in arts organizations throughout North America and beyond. Methods from his writings and workshops have been successfully implemented by several thousand arts organizations and artists in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Japan, Spain, Chile, and Argentina. He has been engaged by foundations, public arts agencies, arts organizations, and individual artists to read, research, and provoke innovative new practices to increase clarity of purpose, engagement in the arts, as well as earned and contributed income. And personally, I've known and worked collaboratively with Jerry for more than 15 years, which seems hard to believe. And I know you're in for a real treat this afternoon. Our goal of today's webinar is that you will gain new skills in capturing and monetizing the impact of your work. And with that, I'm pleased to present Jerry Yoshitomi.
Christy, thank you very much, and thank you all for participating in the session today. I hope that it will be fast-paced. As Christy mentioned, we're going to ask you to do a little bit of typing here as we go to respond to the questions. And I should also say that I've spent a little bit of time, I saw the pre-registration list, I spent a little bit of time on your websites, and I'm actually pleased with the amount of work that you've already accomplished, and hopefully today you'll get some ideas about how to capture a little bit better, do a better job of capturing what you've learned, or the impacts you've made, as well as learn a little bit more about monetizing. And I'm also pleased, as Christy mentioned, I've done some previous work with her and with the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm very pleased to now be working with the new team there, with Dan Katona, Donna Collins, and with Christy and others to, in terms of going forward. So the first slide that that I have actually are some quotes that I use at the beginning of most of my sessions. And one is that, as Einstein said, insanity is doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. And so hopefully we'll actually try to create some new ways of doing things. What really counts is what you learn after you know it all. Again, I think that several of the people on the call have actually have long-standing careers in the field, and so hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, you'll learn a little bit more, even though you may know it all or most of what you need to know. And then, as Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. And so the idea here is to actually try to create some different ways of thinking. Hopefully, much of what you hear today will be new to you. For some of you expert in the field, it might be a bit of a reminder. But then the idea is by the end of the call, you'll have a couple of nuggets that you'll be able to use to monetize your work in the future. So I'd like to begin by actually asking you to think about an instance personally meaningful to you when someone's experience with your organization improved their lives, themselves, their lives, their sense of themselves, I apologize, the typo, or their relationships with others. And it should be sense of themselves rather than self of themselves. So when was this experience? It might even have happened over a period of time. What other people were involved? And if you can, please describe with a metaphor, simile, or just a word. So someone might say, well, for this constituents, it was like a breath of fresh air, and it really changed the way he or she thought about something, and it really enhanced their creativity. For someone else, it could be that your organization feels like a warm, cozy spot, like a warm blanket on a cold winter night. So what I'd like you to do is actually just take a moment to quickly think about it and then type into the chat page this idea of personally meaningful experiences that your organization has created. I know there are many, many, but just take a second, if you would, to actually just type that into the chat page.
Jerry, we have some comments beginning to roll in from Elaine. Finally found a place to fit in. Acceptance. From a local community arts center, John, feels like home. From Emily in Southeastern Ohio, we're like family. From Chris, once in a lifetime opportunity. We have community members that without our events and classes would not have opportunities to participate in the arts. From Lena, great people to mingle with and feel safe. From Jane at Ohio Dance, at our annual festival, many connections are made. Comments from participants are that they gain tools that they will take back with them to their students and schools, studios and schools.
As you're thinking about this, it'd also be helpful, actually, if you think about being a bit more, also being a bit granular and thinking about a specific person, for example, who might have made the connection. And we can say, for example, that 300 people came to this conference and they all made good connections, but it's actually very compelling to say, well, Jerry came and he didn't feel very comfortable as a dance educator, and he really connected to 5 people, and now he's really thinking about pursuing his a master's in dance education or something. So the idea here is to actually try to be as specific and as granular as possible. A couple more, Christy?
Yeah, someone asked where the chat page is. So that the chat, you can either use the question box or the chat box. I'm monitoring both. Those are both in the webinar control panel, which you should have gotten that when you logged into the webinar. So hopefully that will help that question. From Stephanie, what a beautiful teamwork. My love for theater, Netherlands and Canada has caught fire. So that of my son of 14 and daughter of 11. It's deeply happy and sad and fun and impressive interpretation. So connecting it to those people.
So I should mention that Stephanie gets the furthest distance. She's signing in, I think, from Nelson, DC. So, Stephanie, thank you for joining us.
Great.
So I'm going to keep going here. Please keep typing in as you have ideas and thoughts, and also keep that chat box open because we're going to ask a couple of further questions as we go. We should also mention that the chat box will be open throughout the call. So if you think of other things, please go there. What I'd like you to do is to say, if you think about this, actually, to consider how many different people have been similarly impacted over time. So you might just take out a sheet of paper or on your iPad or whatever. Think about how many couples actually have been impacted by this, how many parents, grandparents, or children have been connected, as we just heard about. How many artists, for example, have performed on your stages or been involved with your, just rough numbers. It could be 50, it could be 300. How many critical thinkers or creative workers have come to your performances or your art exhibition and say, well, I work in the tech sector and I went home and I was really able to solve this problem because of something that I saw at your arts organization or because of the poem that I heard. How many millennials are in your audiences? How many, and these categories are not mutually exclusive. Obviously, the couples could be boomers or Gen Xers or millennials, but just think about different segments in your audience. How many seniors, how many youth at risk, maybe other groups you might list. Somebody might list school teachers or firefighters or veterans or whatever. So just give me an idea of how many people have been impacted. And if you could actually just type into your box the total number there. Again, these just add up your column, the column there, and just type in the number into the dialog box or into the question box. And Christy will be reading back to us some of the numbers that we hear.
We have another great story, Jerry, from Anne, who runs a small visual art museum, about a young man who proposed to his partner at the art museum because it was their first date.
He proposed on the first date, or that was where they had their first date?
Where they had their first date.
Okay, okay. This art museum must do no, the thing is, the art museum must do magic. No, I'm just,
I have hundreds has been entered.
Okay. Some other numbers here.
6,000 over 5 years.
Okay. Good. Good.
70,000.
Okay.
Approximately 30,000 tickets sold annually. 23,000 over 14 years.
Okay, massive, great numbers, great numbers. And again, for example, in the number of tickets sold, we might actually have a number of different segments with those tickets. It might be couples, so someone might come in and actually be more connected with the couple or with their partner, and someone else might come in actually and then be more the same person might actually be more invigorated with their work and go back and solve a physics issue that they're trying to resolve at the university. And so again, the 15,000 visitors might actually reflect 45,000 different kinds of experiences. So I want you to sort of hold that in your head, and the idea of different people, when they come in, will actually have different kinds of experiences throughout the. If I'm at a museum, I might see a painting that would connect me more with my children. I might also see a painting that might connect me with a social issue or something else that, so just hold those numbers and those people, if you would, for a while. So the next question is, which is the poll question, is how many of you have these stories on your website? When you click on the website, first thing you see is a photograph of that couple who were engaged at the museum. And so I think you can find the poll over in the dialog box. And in my screen is a little red thing that says poll open. And so so somebody had 35,000 stories, somebody else had 70,000 stories. How many of these stories are available on your website? And if you do have stories on your website, if you might in the chat box, if you say yes, just let us know what kinds of stories are there and whether or not they're available to you. So I'm looking at the poll.
Yeah, we've had 47% of you vote. Just a couple more seconds and we'll reveal the results.
Okay.
Yeah, results are coming in. Good.
Okay. Well, this is an election year, so we all have to be thinking about voting.
Right. We're at 59%. That might be better than some voter turnout. I'm not sure.
Right. Well, so for those of you who haven't voted, let us know if it's because you you're not on a computer screen, or you want to just raise your hand or do something. So I think it's time to reveal the poll, Christy.
Yeah, I'm going to close the poll. So 43% said yes, they do include stories on their website, and 57% said no.
Okay. So for those of you who actually include stories, if you want to go back into the chat box and just give me an idea of how many stories and how present they are. And the 57% who haven't, I actually encourage you to think about it, because that's one of the first aspects of actually getting people to come to your location, is to actually hear about other customers and clients and people who've had positive experiences. So as we go through the call, and thank you to everyone who voted there. So the next slide actually starts us in to think about what I call a value proposition thinking or planning. So most of us actually think about programs that we operate, but in fact what the research is telling us is that the programs reflect experiences for people. And so it's not, and those of you who've done logic model work know that it's just not the outputs that matter here, it's actually the outcomes. What happens to people when they come to the museum? And we often don't collect information, or if we do collect the information, we frequently publicize it to other people. So it's important here to actually think about who the beneficiaries are. And again, as I mentioned previously, there are multiple aspects to various people's lives. So one can be a parent, a grandparent, an active worker, a volunteer in a Rotary Club, a number of different aspects of people's lives. So we need to think about actually what I would call beneficiary segments. And Wolf Brown and others have actually done some very good work in recent years looking at the segments of groups who participate in our organization. So once we think about the segments, because if I go to a museum, I'm a grandparent, I actually want to think about what did other grandparents say about their experiences with their grandchildren? Or I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old grandchild. Is it going to be the same for me if I take them to see the children's theater performance as the grandparent who took their 8- and 10-year-old, for example? And what are the results that are happening? And then the question becomes, what are the impacts of my participation? So the impacts actually reflect what some of you talked about earlier in terms of the those stories we had in slide 3, the stories that Christy read back to us about the people who are more connected because of dance. I thought that if we actually connect those actually gather those impacts and communicate them, that in fact we'll actually have more people who are invested in our operation. Either more grandparents who will bring their children to a performance, or more people in the community who will recognize that families are bonding because of our activity, or more tech companies might support our work because of the good things that we do for their workers. And the idea then is, what are our value propositions? What are the ways in which we actually communicate our impacts? And I would encourage you to go back into the chat box or the question box and actually give me a value proposition that reflects your organization, that is not about outputs, that is not about programs, but it's actually about experiences. Some of you I know on your websites have actually able to say, we create experiences for young adults so that they can actually participate in theater. But beyond the experiences, what is the impacts of that? So I encourage some of you to again start typing in what are the impacts, in fact, of the experiences that you create. In other words, and some might substitute the word outcomes for impacts. But so, what are the impacts? Someone says, well, why do you exist? I used to say, well, I exist to put on great shows. But what we're learning actually is that in today's world, that's not sufficient. The question actually people are asking is, what's going to happen to me if I go see your great show? What is going to happen to my sense of myself, my relationship with other people? How is my life going to change because I've had that experience with you? And you've already told us about the experiences that people are having. So I'm asking you, saying, what is your value proposition for your organization? So Christy, I'm assuming that people are typing in their value propositions?
They are. From Elaine, build friendships among other young artists.
Great, perfect.
From Martha at Spaces. Spaces is the premier organization in Ohio that solely commissions the creation of new art and serves as a national model. With one-of-a-kind programming, recognition as an innovator in the cultural sphere, strong leadership, sound fiscal management, Spaces is a vital resource in the community.
So I would actually suggest that that's an interim outcome. That's not a final impact. And so I'm not familiar with that organization, but it might actually be helpful for you to gather some data about the people who've been impacted and gather a few stories of the folks. So we're finding now that donors, grant makers may be impressed by the fact that we're the oldest, the biggest, the most impactful, the only one in this jurisdiction. But I think in terms of individuals being asked to support with some money, the question becomes then, what is the impact? If we're trying to monetize this work, it actually starts talking about impact. And I will be there for, in fact, the conference is called Arts Impact Ohio on May 19th, and I'm also pleased to chat with some of you if you want to talk about this further on that day. Christy, other impact statements?
Yeah, from John, spark learning and provide further creative conversations. From Elaine, education.
Okay, so John, that's an interim output or a interim outcome. It's not necessarily, it's what you do. It's not necessarily what the impact is on people. So I encourage you again, just as the previous conversation, to push you along a little bit in terms of what's the, I'm not asking what you do, I'm asking what is the result of what you do is what I'm going to try to push you a little bit on. Yeah. And so often we're asked to do mission statements, and these are great mission statements, but they're not necessarily impact statements. Okay, someone else?
From Amanda, help our clients build community pride by defining homegrown values and expressions and putting them into their built environment.
Okay, so I would just actually take the word help out of that, and I would just say clients are able to do these things because of our work. So help is what you do, the clients taking charge of their lives is what they do. And then you're easily able to gather information not about help that you provide, but the results, and then you can go back into the investors and say, we need your help to provide, let us help other people. Okay, let's keep going here. Others, Christy?
Yeah, oh, they're coming in fast and furious now. Y'all are working hard. Oh, hang on. There's one on here from Stephanie about teamwork. Teaches participants teamwork, creates friendships, and helps youth build self-esteem.
That's perfect. And again, what's really good about that impact is the fact that that's measurable, right? We can actually go ask the teens, do you know people that you didn't know 6 months ago? Are you now working more cooperatively on a project? And then we could also say, how do you think this may help you when you go to university or when you're on the work site? So that's perfect. So again, part of impact is thinking about how do we measure the impact of our work. Okay, Christy?
There are several around access, providing access in places that might not otherwise. There's a handful of those for people.
Okay, so again, I would actually say we don't provide access just from the standpoint to say low-income people have access, right, to opportunities, for example. And then you can actually interview that low-income person and say, what is the importance for you of that access? So so the English majors on the call will correct me on this, but my sense of the impact statement actually begins with a noun rather than a verb. So it would actually say low-income people have access rather than we provide access. And it moves us in the logic model sense further to the right on the logic model. Someone else? Christy?
People get back into the community. This is from Teresa. Help people succeed in life. Students do better in school. People make friends and are sociable.
Great, great. Again, all those are we can do a quick survey and say, how many new friends have you made? And then I'll talk about this in a minute, but also you're able to go back to the people who you impacted 10 years ago and say, did this team building we did 10 years ago with you help you in your university or your early job life, for example? I'm going to go one more comment, Christy, and then I'm going to go back to the slides.
Yeah, there are several, too, about artists, helping artists showcase their work, connect to community, develop collaborations. There's a theme there for those who work with artists.
Okay, and again, I think those are great. I would just take the word helping out, and the impact is artists. And again, you go to the, so helping artists is what you do. Artists being empowered is what happens to them. And so we look at impact. So your experiences, I would suggest, are describing we help artists, we give them, empower them, we give them, studio space. That's what you do, but the impacts is they create great art. They feel stronger about themselves because of the support that you give. So again, so the idea of this call is to both capture those as well as to think about ways in which we might monetize those. So the question becomes, who might value the impacts that, in fact, that you're now providing? The next slide is Chris Anderson's work describing what he calls the long tail, and the y-axis, the red is the impact of something, and so the x-axis is time. And so, for example, Joyce would have written Ulysses about 105 years ago. In the early part of the century, it would actually have gotten, so in the red area, there's interest in it. It's of some controversy. It's read in the UK and Ireland and Canada and the U.S. and other English-speaking countries. And then maybe over time, as the red goes to the yellow, it maybe goes out of print, and there's less interest in it. But what Anderson's view is that because the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is time, that what happens is that there are spikes that occur over on the right-hand side. So, for example, there could be the the centenary of Joyce's birth, which I think was about 5 years ago, and so people will go on eBay and try to find copies of it. I'll take a copy off my shelf. Maybe I'll read a chapter or two, and then I'll put it and mail it to somebody. And so Anderson's view is that the long tail actually is the yellow area is larger than the red area. And so part of this I encourage you to do, those of you who have organizations where you may have actually started 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, is to actually find and interview some people who are your alumni and actually say to them, what was the impact of the this program on you? And when Christy and I were working together, I recall the interview, there was in North Carolina, they were looking to restart an artisan schools program that had been dormant because of a lack of funding from the legislature. And so they went to try to get some ideas of what the impacts had been of the previous artisan schools program. And there was a mayor of a small North Carolina town who was a very fiscally conservative person, but when he heard about it, he said, I will go directly to the state legislature to lobby for a reinstatement of the artisan schools program. And he said, well, why? You're a very fiscally conservative person. You think money should be spent only on government necessities. And he said, this is the necessity. The artisan schools program changed my life 25 years ago when I was in the 8th grade. And I know exactly what it does, and I will fight as much as I can to support this. So you may want to think about contacting people who, for example, if you have a youth program, I know youth programs that I've worked with that have been in existence for 20 or 30 years, they'll actually find some people maybe who went through the program 20 or 25 years ago who are now have a little bit of income and will donate $5 a month or whatever just to support the work because they know how important it is to a teenager. One place to do this in small communities actually is through high school reunions, is to actually think about how you actually access people at those points in time. It's also a good time to get people to think about moving back to your community because of the great work that you do. This is an impact study that we launched actually in Canada, and we actually asked people, do you experience joy, share creative experiences, enhance your own creativity? And over 80% of the people have said that they experience joy at the arts organizations. And so at the end of the call today, we're going to provide an opportunity for people, if they wish, for the first 5 people who sign up to actually launch an online survey of your audiences to ask them a very similar set of questions. And in terms of joy, the other 3 top-ranking things, again, they're related to others. To 60% of the people were connect with other people, being transformed, and actually nourish my soul were 3 of the high-scoring points. And so it's possible here to take emotional responses, feeling responses, put them into a survey and actually quantify them. These were some experiences that people referenced when they talked or when they responded to the survey. Taking my children when they were younger, I have gratitude. Grandchildren, new experiences help them grow, watching delight in their faces. My mother loses herself in a free-flowing motion of dance. The entire family is at a concert, never sat down, escaped from the hardships of life, experienced my full humanity, camaraderie with other patrons. And when you receive these comments directly from people, what that does is it actually encourages them to buy another ticket to tell a friend about this. And all you really have to do is just ask them the question of what is their personally meaningful experience. And so this is a word cloud based on that same survey. And so these are the words, again, these are unsolicited words saying, what did you experience? And so family, love, attend, these are the things that you'll find, and we will do word clouds for the 5 organizations that participate in the online survey. So the question becomes then, to whom is it of importance that these impacts have occurred? and who might be investors to donate to support further impacts. And so if you think about that list of people that you worked on a few slides ago, and the numbers that you aggregated, I hope, some of you reaching into the thousands. To whom is it important? So would, for example, would a florist be interested in helping support the work of the museum, because that's a place where people ask each other to be, to marry them? Or the parents or grandparents or children who, would grandparents from across the country actually be willing to go online and support their child's participation in the youth drama activity, even though they actually can't be there for the performance, and so on. So the question becomes, to whom is this important? And then the next part of it is, how many people does this represent? So, would the auntie who lives in Florida, would it be important? So I'll just give you a minute to actually, again, run these numbers. And I encourage you to actually then do a total, if you would. So to whom is it important? Is it important to other artists, that there are 10 artists a year who receive stipends or studio space? Is it important to the Chamber of Commerce that we have this space here? Is it important to the art supply stores that we support visual artists? So again, I encourage you to put those people down, and then put some numbers again in the third column there, how many people, and then just type back in the numbers that you would be getting.
And
I know that we maybe, so Christy, you starting to see some numbers?
no numbers yet. I want to let you know we have just about 22 minutes left in the webinar.
Perfect, perfect.
Someone said these are hard questions, Jerry.
Well, I think as one of the Einstein quotes is, we just sort of thinking about doing things differently. And none of you would want to participate in a webinar that had easy questions, right? We all want to actually take on the hard, and each of you are actually doing the heavy lifting, running your programs and working with your organization. So frankly, the work you do outside of this webinar is much more difficult than these few questions we're going to be asking here.
Elaine says we can't quantify it all. Guessing our numbers would double from 70,000 to 150,000.
Great, great, perfect. Yeah, this is an idea of actually trying to get some sense of what the numbers might be. Someone else? So just imagine if you took Elaine's factor of just doubling your previous number as a guide. So we're thinking about auntie or grandpa or business owners or whatever, and not all business owners would actually participate in this. But for example, what would happen if each of those people donated $5 to your operation? So if I'm doing my math correctly, $5 times 70,000 people would be an additional $350,000 per year. And I would imagine that each of those people could donate $5 if they, maybe some of them would donate 2 and some of them would donate 10, but I would imagine that each of those people have the capacity to donate funds. And so it's really an idea of actually for us to just think about what it is we might do to encourage that to happen. I'm going to now go through Any other numbers coming back in, Christy?
Yeah, we have 1,000 connected to a family series for parents, grandparents, and children who it's important to. Probably relates to 1,000. Someone put in the idea around creative workers, 36 full-time jobs per year, which might go up to 150,000 per year in revenue.
Right, right. That's perfect. No, again, it's for the difficult part of this is actually think about people who might be donors who actually we didn't previously think about as donors. This is the next piece is a storytelling opportunity. I'm actually, because of time, I'm not going to have you write the story, but the idea would be if I say John, who is in 10th grade at Venice High School here in California, is about to drop out of school, and he went to this summer. Last summer, though, he went to Venice Arts, their summer school program, the summer school program, and took ceramics. And so he had this experience, enjoyed it so much that he went back to Venice High School, got his grades back together, and now he's applying for a scholarship to go to UCLA. And so what I just told you was about a 45-word story that actually helps people think through the people who are actually impacted by their program. And so, actually, I'm going to do this. So I'd like people to actually, and I usually give people 5 minutes. We're on a webinar, so I'll give you about 3 minutes to write a story talking about someone who has been impacted by your program. Again, my story is John. So 10th grade boy, you get an idea of who, and I don't need to say 10th grade boy because I say John in 10th grade, I have an idea of how old he is. It's universal. He was about to drop out of school. We know young people who are going through that. Went to the summer program at Venice Arts, and then went back to school and is now applying for scholarship to UCLA. So if you were John's grandparent in Florida, how much would you donate so that John could take ceramics classes? Right? You might not want to buy him a video game, but you actually might pay his tuition for this summer's Venice Arts Advanced Ceramics class. So just take a moment. You talked previously about the people who've been impacted. You've talked about your value proposition that artists have been impacted by the organization. So so just quickly write a story. I'm even going to ask the OAC staff who are on the call to even write a story. Maybe Christy could even write a story. This is unscripted, so we'll see what she can do in 3 minutes as well.
I am monitoring the stories, Jerry. I got my hands full.
Okay, okay.
I have done your exercise, Mr. Yoshitomi.
Yes. In 3 minutes, right?
In 3 minutes. I've done this, y'all.
Okay. So just type it into the chat. You don't have to write it out first. Just type it into the chat as if it's a Facebook post. Don't overthink this. So just tell us a story about someone who's changed by your organization, who's going through troubles and who's changed by your organization.
Yeah, so we have a couple coming in. Emily writes,
okay.
Lee gave us a $1,000 donation, which was significant for her because she looked at her CD collection and realized she'd purchased them all after seeing concerts at the Stewart's Opera House.
Mm-hmm. Great. Perfect.
Another one, Elaine writes, a teen with depression and bouts of mental illness came to our art center for an after-school program. This 10-month program has created confidence, friendships, and brought this young person out of her gloom.
Good. Perfect. Perfect. And again, you can just say Susie M. or, you don't have to identify the person, but it's helpful to also give us an idea of how old that person is. Like I did 10th grade. So Susie could be 14, she could be 17. It just creates a different sense of specificity in our minds because we know 14-year-olds, we know 17-year-olds, and teenagers change personalities about every half a day, I think. And others, these are great. These are perfect.
Yeah, from Teresa. Tom was isolating himself and staying away from all his family and friends. As he attended our program, he found kindness and understanding with other artists. He found joy in doing art and being creative with others. He gained good friends and stopped isolating himself.
These are great. If they're not on your website, these stories should be on your website within the next 24 hours, or at least posted on your Facebook page or whatever. These are fabulous.
From Melody.
The question get easier. Go ahead.
From Melody, female high school senior, wrote to us that she was dealing with gender identity issues and was very depressed. She saw our production of Hamlet, in which Hamlet was played by a female. She wrote that this helped her find her own voice in her life and gave her a brighter outlook on her own mental health.
Perfect. Perfect. And again, these don't necessarily all need to be youth-oriented. These stories could be about the artists we talked about earlier, or it could be, a couple that actually sees your theater as a date night for themselves, or the folks who proposed at the museum. So just keep writing your stories. I'm going to keep us moving here. So the next part of this is thinking about how you take these stories and ask people. So donors want to give to impacts, not organizations. To those of you who have donate buttons on your site, I seriously recommend that you change that donate button to a support a teen, change someone's life, make it an action word. People will give when asked by a person, even if they don't know you, but they will give if they trust the organization. So I encourage you to actually say, support other youth like Johnny, or support other youth like Susie who are going through gender identity issues, right? And again, a letter is not an ask. An ask is one person asking another person. So the question I won't ask is, the question is, how many people have you asked for money in the last 12 months? And for many organizations, I think that would probably be 0. You may have written a lot of letters, you might have put a lot of calls, but the question is, and you can email, but only if it's personal. And then donors will feel good about what they're doing, no matter the size of their gift. So if they know that they supported a program, in fact, I was just on a call this week with somebody from a concert series in Smithers in northern British Columbia, and they actually brought in an artist who really helped work with their LGBT community and made it more comfortable to be lesbian, gay, or trisexual or transsexual in that community. Small amounts will increase if people feel the impact that they're making. If they have stories that are on their site saying, our donors last month actually supported this ticket program so people with of low income can actually come, and then people will follow their money telling stories about the difference they made. So again, you can use these stories that we've created, and again, the stories that you've written are basically, they're just the output of the heavy lifting you've done over time, right? So they're really just ways in which you can actually think about an opportunity to give people, giving people the opportunity to support the good work that you do. So we think it is monetizing the work, but from their standpoint, it's actually being able to be a part of the change that you are about. So the last question, this question should be easy for most of you. So the question is, what key messages did you hear today, if any, and what might you do as a result? And so I'm going to just have Christy read these thoughts. So again, we went through a lot of material. Hopefully some of you are taking pretty quick notes. You've actually written some stories, but what key messages, if any, did you hear, and what might you do as a result? And then Christy is also going to talk a little bit about the survey that we have available to the first 5 folks who sign up, and then also talk about May 19th. But I'm just going to wait to see Christy, are we hearing any more from any of the stories that people had you want to read and or take-home messages from today?
We are, and I would just add, Jerry, I was reminded about the power of this question many, many years ago when I worked at the Ohio Arts Council before. Before we knew this work and the power of this work, I watched this happen on the floor of the Senate in a budget testimony. One senator told his personally meaningful arts experience, and the other 7 followed suit. And we didn't have to really say a word of our testimony because they told the story for us. So I was reminded as you were going through that last slide about the power of, if you're in front of a city council or in front of somebody else kind of looking for those extra dollars, if you can get them to tell the story, it's so much more powerful. So Elaine says they'll put success stories on their website. Jane also says we'll add stories to our website and add the impact for youth. Emily says see your donors as people upon whom you have a tangible impact. And Teresa says find people we have impacted and interview them. The hard part is finding people. That's what we got.
So Teresa, if you want to write in a little bit more specifically about the organization and how to find them, or who you're looking for, I might actually have some ideas that have been tried some other places.
Yeah, Teresa's with We Care Arts, which is over in Dayton, and they do a lot of work with people with disabilities.
Right. So I think I think that part of this becomes going to some of the people who may have experienced your work over time, somebody who was there 5 and 10 years ago. And again, I don't know a lot about the folks with disabilities, but I would think actually some kind of an online method and maybe follow up with some phone calls or something might be a way. But if you have Teresa, if you have some specific questions, I'm pleased to respond. If you want to send the question into Christy, but I think the one thing I was going to actually suggest is for those of you who have newspapers, sort of small town newspapers, big town newspapers, if it's possible to either do a paid ad or something, as but basically you're actually in search of people who, so you might actually see if the newspaper if you give them copy, might actually do a story once a week of someone who is changed by the arts in Dayton, for example, and and just say, we'll give you, a 100-word story and a photograph if you'll run it every week. And that might be something that the Dayton arts community could gather together, talk with the publisher at the paper. And so my understanding of paper is that they're actually looking for content, particularly local content. And if you're willing to provide the local content, I think they might be willing to run that or do it as a mini ad or just do it as an experiment. The other thing to say about this phone call is we talked about a lot of different ways of doing things. And so don't decide that you need to change everything immediately, but do some experiments and see what the uptake is. So for example, if you add stories to your website, make certain that you have a push strategy to get that web link and that story out in front of other people. And the one thing that I found is that everybody who's in a story on a website will forward that to their friends and people that they know and put it on their Facebook, put that link on their Facebook page and everything. So
we have a question related to that. It's actually a great question related to that. What's the thought on the use of names? Real names, not real names. What helps build credibility of the story and or the quote? Is it important or not?
Well, I think hopefully I think one would want to get permission from that person. And I would do as much as possible to retain anonymity. So when I said, John was a high schooler in 10th grade at Venice High School, that really could be any. I didn't say when it was, and so I think it becomes the idea. I mean, if you can get John a little photograph of John's, with his ceramic pot, and he's willing to do that, and John's parents accept that, then that's great. And so, I'm not an expert on privacy, but I think if you just think about this, to say, if I said a high schooler at Venice High School went to ceramics class, or if I said John W., a 10th grader, it's a different, the story connects in a different way. And so I encourage you to try to be as specific as possible. And again, that's obviously the confidentiality issues are for yours to work out. But I think to try to get as, so we tend to do in grant applications, we tend to say 15,000 teenagers went to Venice Arts last year and they took ceramics, and half of them are now applying to scholarship for UCLA. For many of us, perceptually, we really can't grasp that, and it doesn't really have, gee, that's 50, I can't really help that. But if I said, John actually is doing this, he's now on scholarship, but he needs a little bit of tuition help to go back to that second summer, Jerry, would you be willing to give $25? Most people would actually find that $25 to support John. And so I think in our asks, we need to, and we're actually going to be talking about this a lot more on May 19th, about the specifics about how you make the asks, and hopefully best ways to do it. Christy, I know we're running up to time. Any other people, what message did they hear? What will they do as a result? Oh, and also those who are going to put it on their website, that's fabulous. And I'll be wanting to see what you're doing there. So I'll in about a week or two, I'll look and see how you're doing.
Yeah, from
other people?
Yeah, from John, people respond, lessons learned, people respond to impact. We will ask people to share their stories, and in return, we will share their stories on our website, through social media, and in person, in particular in relation to current programming.
Great.
Awesome.
Anyone else?
That's all I got for now. Shall we talk about May 19th? We have about 3 minutes left, and we want to get to that survey opportunity. So May 19th, everybody, go to the Ohio Arts Council website. You can register for Arts Impact Ohio. It's our first statewide arts conference in about 15 years, and we're really excited for the day. You can come on May 18th to the Governor's Awards for the Arts and then stay over, have some participatory arts experiences, a reception at the Columbus Museum of Art, and then on May 19th have a full day of professional development. As Jerry mentioned, Jerry will be with us that day. We'll be doing some work around increasing revenues. I'll be doing a session on leading with limited authority. We'll look at different ways to engage people from millennials up through older adults and the importance of that work. We're working to finalize the final list of speakers, but we have some folks confirmed, and it's going to be a really exciting day. So tell your friends, bring a colleague, go out there and sign up. It's $50 for the day. It's really a great value for the content that will be delivered. And Jerry's done these arts impact surveys really across the country and across the world, and has offered this opportunity to 5 of you to participate in this arts impact survey. I know, Jerry, you uploaded a sample, right, a draft of that as a handout.
Yes. Yes.
So do you want to talk about how, I already have someone who's responded, they went in, so we've got 1 spot.
Well, at the bottom of the slide is the URL to actually go to SurveyMonkey and to apply. And I am asking that you send out the survey link once we get it, and the samples available for you to see, the survey link to up to 2,000 people. And then also you'll provide some kind of an incentive of a value of about $100 to be put into a drawing, so that one of those people would win that incentive. And I'll basically take, at the end of the day today, I'll see who's applied, and we're looking for a certain amount of geographic and discipline diversity. So, for example, if you're the first museum from Southwest Ohio will take you, but the second museum in Southwest Ohio will probably have to wait until we see if we get, you know, a music organization from Northeast or whatever to fill it out. So anyway, so again, this is an experiment, and you know, and it will not be perfect, but it will be very, very good. So.
Great. I put
thank you all very much
in the chat window, so you might be able to click on it before we end the webinar. We'll make sure you have it. Thank you, Jerry, very much for doing this workshop for us, and we're really looking forward to seeing you here on May 19th. Watch for the survey in your inbox. Please take a minute to do that. In fact, your responses to that survey will help us for May 19th so that we can design a workshop that's really meaningful to all of you related to our conversation on impact. So again, thanks for joining us today, and have a terrific rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.